Another big Hillary Clinton lie blows up the political scene. Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona is on his way out, and he slams the door on his way out. We'll talk about all of that. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. So a couple of huge news items that I want to go through today in detail, give you my perspective on them, and give you a little bit of background so that you know what you're talking about when you talk about it at the water cooler today. But before we get to that, first I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at Helix Sleep. So there are a lot of places that you can get an online mattress. The only place that you should go is to my friends over at Helix Sleep. If you go to helixsleep.com/Ben, you take their simple 2 to 3 minute sleep quiz. They ask you, your height, your weight, your body type. Do you like the mattress to be firm, or do you like it to be softer? Do you like it to be breathable? Do you like it to be kind of heat absorbent? They built a custom mattress that will be the best thing you've ever slept on. We had a more expensive mattress in our bedroom, and then they sent us the Helix Sleep mattress, and the more expensive mattress was banished to the other room because Helix Sleep is just that good. For couples, they can even personalize both sides of the mattress. Everyone from GQ to Cosmo to the New York Times are talking about Helix, and you'll know why once you try it out. Plus, it's risk-free. When your custom mattress arrives to your door, they send it to you in a box, you unpack it, it immediately inflates because it's foam, and shipping is completely free. You can try it for 100 nights, and if you don't like it, they'll pick it up and refund you in full. Go to helixsleep.com/Ben right now, and you get $50 toward your custom mattress. That is helixsleep.com/Ben for $50 off your order. Again, that's helixsleep.com/Ben. They also have a bunch of other great products, like they have the Helix Mattress Protector and the Helix Foundation. Now, all these things are just terrific products. Check it out over at helixsleep.com/Ben. Get $50 toward your custom mattress and sleep better at night. Okay, so something that may not have you sleeping well at night, and certainly doesn't have Hillary Clinton sleeping well at night, is a story that is breaking out from the Washington Post last night. So you need a little bit of background to understand what exactly is going on here. So first I have to explain to you what the Trump-Russia dossier is. If you remember back to earlier this year, BuzzFeed released a dossier that was full of information, some of it more credible than others. People have been saying that the entire dossier has been debunked. That is not true. Some of the dossier has actually been substantiated. Some of the dossier has not. The parts that were not substantiated included the absurd allegation that Donald Trump went to Moscow and rented a room that the Obamas stayed in and then had a bunch of Russian prostitutes come in and pee all over the bed, right? That was P-gate, if you recall this. It was ridiculous. We made fun of it. That, of course, is not true, or at least there's no evidence to that effect. If there were, then that would be the greatest political story in the history of mankind. But it is not. So in any case, that dossier comes out from BuzzFeed earlier this year. And it came out because it had been presented, the dossier, to President Trump, or at least a summary of the allegations had been presented to President Trump by then FBI Director James Comey just before Trump became president of the United States. So where did this dossier come from? The reason people were asking this is because there were concerns that maybe the Russians had basically been putting out bad info, and that bad info had been used by the Obama administration as an excuse to wiretap all of Trump's friends. Right? This is the allegations. The allegation is, and it's more of a conspiracy theory than an allegation, that the Russians were using Christopher Steele basically as a cutout. This is the spy who's responsible for the compilation of the dossier, that he knew that the Russians were giving him bad information. He put it in the dossier, which was funded by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. That dossier was then provided to the Obama FBI, and the Obama FBI used that as an excuse to wiretap people like Carter Page, the Trump foreign policy advisor, or Mike Flynn, the one-time Trump national security advisor. That's the allegation anyway. There are a few pieces of evidence that have to be there in order for this allegation to hold true. One, we have to show that Christopher Steele, the spy, actually was being played by the Russians. Number two, we have to show that the DNC and Hillary knew that Christopher Steele was being played by the Russians. That would look like collusion, right? The sort of collusion that Democrats have been accusing Trump of. And three, we would have to show that the FBI, in bad faith, went after people like Carter Page and people like Mike Flynn based on evidence they knew was shoddy in order to target them. That contention is pretty extreme, considering that, again, if the Democrats were really focused on just getting out bad information about Trump, then why would this dossier not have come out in, say, September of 2016, like before the election? It didn't. So here is the full timeline on the Trump-Russia dossier. So Wikipedia actually has a pretty good timeline here, so I'll use that as the basis for this. In September 2015, there was a wealthy Republican donor who opposed Trump's candidacy in the Republican primary. So he went to Fusion GPS and asked them to compile an Oppo research file. For months they did. Okay, then this Republican donor, after Trump won the nomination, the Republican donor basically dropped out. And that's when, in April 2016, the investigation, contract, and funding was taken over by a law firm called Perkins Coie, owned by Mark Elias. or Elias. He's the lawyer who represented both the DNC and the Clinton presidential campaign. So the Hillary campaign knew, the DNC knew, the Hillary people are claiming they didn't know. That's really not credible. And it was not until after Elias came on board that Christopher Steele was hired as the dossier compiler. So the claim has been basically that even Mark Elias didn't know Steele was the guy compiling the dossier. That's a little bit weak. In June 2016, it was revealed the DNC had been hacked by Russian sources, so Fusion GPS hired Orbis Business Intelligence, which is a private British intelligence firm, to look into the Russian connections, and that investigation was undertaken by Steele. That's how Steele gets involved. He only gets involved after the Democrats take over the funding for the Trump-Russia dossier. He delivers his report in a series of memos. From June through September. He believed the FBI was not taking it seriously, and so it ended up in the hands of John McCain, among other people, who brought it to the FBI, and finally James Comey in January 2017 brings it to the attention of President Trump. That's the timeline on the Trump-Russia dossier. So it is not correct when the media say that the Republicans funded the Steele dossier. That's not technically true. They funded the beginning of the investigation before Steele was involved. When the Republicans, when conservatives say that this was obvious collusion between Hillary Clinton and the Russian government, again, no evidence to that effect. In fact, there is much more evidence that Donald Trump Jr., for example, was attempting to make nice with the Russians than that Hillary Clinton was attempting to make nice with the Russians, at least insofar as this. She was attempting to make nice with the Russians in all likelihood with regard to selling 20% of America's uranium stockpile. But with regard to gathering Trump Oppo intel research, not any evidence to support that. Also, the idea that the FBI was acting on orders from the Kremlin in order to get Trump, that also seems like a bit of a stretch. The reason that I lay all of this out is because I want you to have the truth about what exactly is happening here. Right? I think that there's a lot of lies being told by both sides. On the left, they're saying, this is no big deal at all. You know, Oppo research is Oppo research. What's the big deal? The big deal is that if you knew, and we don't know the answer to this yet, if you knew the Oppo research was based on Russian intel and the Russians were funneling that intel to Christopher Steele, then it looks like collusion. So we just don't know the answer to that one yet. On the right, the same answer applies. We don't know the answer to that one yet, so you can't assume that such collusion was taking place in the first place. So here's what the Washington Post reported, and here's the key component. Okay, Mark Elias apparently lied to the New York Times about his involvement in the dossier. So apparently, he told Maggie Haberman of the New York Times he was not involved in the compilation of the dossier at all. He suggested the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign did not fund the dossier. That turns out to be false. The Washington Post reports that last night, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped fund research that resulted in a now famous dossier containing allegations about President Trump's connections to Russia and possible coordination between his campaign and the Kremlin, people familiar with the matter said. Mark Elias, a lawyer representing the Clinton campaign and the DNC, retained Fusion GPS, a Washington firm, to conduct the research. After that, Fusion GPS hired dossier author Christopher Steele, a former British intel officer with ties to the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community. So Maggie Haberman was getting all sorts of crap over at the New York Times because yesterday, after this came out, she tweeted out, quote, "Folks involved in funding this lied about it and with sanctimony for a year." Now, it just shows you that the rabid left is just as bad as some of the more rabid people on the right. They went after Maggie Haberman tooth and nail for this. So Mark Elias lied to her. She said he lied to me, and she's the bad guy, right? She's the problem here, Maggie Haberman, who has been thoroughly Trump skeptical from the start. In any case, it says Fusion GPS officials had pled the fifth before the House Intel Committee to avoid answering funding questions. So there's still questions. Why was the DNC and why were Hillary hiding this, right? That's the big question here. What do they have to hide? Because they were lying about it for months or taking the fifth. Like, what's the big deal? Why didn't they just come up front and say, listen, sure, we funded an Oppo research file. Sure, Christopher Steele was one of those guys. So? I mean, if the implication is, well, they were using foreign sources to gather intel, we already knew that from Hillary's camp. They were using the Ukrainian government to gather foreign intel. We know that. Politico reported it last year. So, again, the real question here is, as always with the Clintons, what are they trying to hide? The Clintons are so bad at covering things up that whenever they cover things up, the cover-up ends up being worse than the original crime, right? Hillary did this with regard to the Whitewater Papers. Hillary's still the only first lady in American history to be fingerprinted by the FBI. Hillary Clinton did this with regard to her email chains, right? She deleted 33,000 emails, then claimed it was completely innocent. Every clumsy attempt to obfuscate the truth ends up making people more and more suspicious. There's a reason to be suspicious around here. There's a reason to be suspicious about all of this. There's also reason to be suspicious because it's not like Fusion GPS hasn't worked with the Russians before. So William Browder is a businessman who pushed for sanctions on Russia. He's testified in the past that the Russian government used Fusion GPS before to conduct a smear campaign against him personally. Browder admitted he couldn't connect Russian funding to the anti-Trump dossier, which means President Trump's theory of FBI Democratic Russian collusion is not supported by the evidence, but certain key Democrats did apparently lie about the Fusion GPS report funding, and the question is why. So that question remains an open question. And now the Democrats are pushing back by saying, listen, this is just an effort to discredit the dossier entirely. Well, yes, it is. I mean, by some people on the right, I think it is a disingenuous effort to say that everything in the dossier has already been discredited. As I say, some of it has been discredited, some of it has not. But there are serious open questions on both sides of this. One, what in the dossier is true? Two, was Steele being used by the Russians? Three, did the Democratic Party know that Steele was being used by the Russians? And four, why did the Democrats lie about all of this if it was just an innocent Oppo research attempt? Right. So here is Adam Schiff, who's a very militant anti-Trump guy, California representative, and he says that this entire story is just an effort to discredit Christopher Steele.
Christopher Steele, no matter who is paying for his services, may have discovered before our own intelligence agencies that the Russians were going to interfere in our election on behalf of Donald Trump. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of a lot of the claims in the dossier, but I don't think it really adds much value to know who paid for it necessarily. And I view this as part of the effort to discredit him, which really doesn't advance the investigation.
Okay, so Adam Schiff making the case that this is all just obfuscation. Well, it may all be obfuscation, but the Clinton campaign has some questions to answer. Now, a lot of people are doing this routine like, well, Hillary Clinton's not president, so who cares? Why is it a big deal? If Hillary's not president, what exactly are you whining about? And the answer is, if she had been president, you'd be saying it's beneath her to answer these questions. So wrongdoing is still wrongdoing. And again, it does shed light on the Russian collusion stuff if, in fact, it turns out that the FBI used this dossier as the basis to wiretap people like Carter Page and Mike Flynn, and it was done in corrupt fashion with the help of the Russian government. We just don't have that information at this point. Any suggestions to the contrary are not true. Okay, any suggestions to the contrary that the conspiracy theories have been confirmed, not true. So let's not get out in front of the story. Okay, I want to get to Jeff Flake resigning from the Senate in just a moment. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. So we always hear the stories in the news about the guy who shoots an intruder in his house. And we think that's the end of the story, right? It's all over after that, no big deal. Well, it is a big deal because the fact is the police are going to show up and then they're going to ask questions about why certain people were shot, about how you used your gun. And this is why you need to know how to talk to the police. You also need to know how to handle a gun around the house, how to handle a gun in a public scenario. You will learn in the 2017 Concealed Carry and Family Defense Guide from the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. You'll learn how to detect attackers before they see you, how to survive a mass shooting, the safest and most dangerous places to sit in a restaurant, how to responsibly own and store a gun, even if you have little kids, and a whole lot more. It's 164 pages of great advice and knowledge that you need about concealed carry and weapon ownership generally. It comes with a bonus audio version so you can even listen in your car. This life-changing guide is 100% free for a limited time. You also get a bonus home defense checklist. Go to defendmyfamilynow.com, defendmyfamilynow.com for 100% free instant access right now. That's defendmyfamilynow.com. Again, defendmyfamilynow.com. Okay, so the other big story of the day is the chaos that's broken out inside the Republican Party, and it's all around Jeff Flake as well as Senator Bob Corker. So we talked about Corker yesterday, and the fact that Corker is really kind of an oozy, sleazy guy, and that he and Donald Trump have now gone at it, and so Corker is in opposition to President Trump somewhat conveniently, and has decided he was not going to run for re-election. Now, Corker, if he had run for re-election, probably would have won. Jeff Flake is a bit of a different story. I think the story that's being told to you by the media today is not true. Okay, the story that's being told to you by the media today is basically Jeff Flake, intrepid Trump fighter, struck down in the prime of his young career because he stood up against the nastiest man in the universe, Donald Trump. Breitbart and Trump stand ascendant over the prone Flake's body as Flake speaks the truth to power. That's the story that you're getting, and you're getting it from all sides. You're getting it from Flake's camp, you're getting it from the Breitbart Trump people, and you're getting it from the media. And I have to say, I don't think this story is even close to the full story. So first, let me express what I think the interests are for everyone in doing what happened yesterday. So to move back a little bit, Jeff Flake yesterday, the senator from Arizona, announced he would not run for re-election, and then he gave a long speech just ripping into President Trump, as well as Republicans who were basically soft pedaling President Trump for a long time. Now, to Flake's credit in terms of consistency, Flake did not endorse President Trump during the last election cycle and was very critical of President Trump. So I'm not saying that his opposition to President Trump is insincere. I think it is sincere. But I think the problem for Jeff Flake is that he knew that he was going down, and so for the past few months, he has basically attempted to carve out a position as the anti-Trump guy, right? The guy who's going to earn strange new respect from the left for saying things about Trump. Now, I want to be fair here. I've said a lot of the same things about President Trump Jeff Flake says about President Trump. I agree with a lot of what Jeff Flake says about President Trump. But the difference is that I also compliment Trump when I think he does something right. And I also acknowledge that people voted for Trump not because they embraced Trumpism, not because they think that Trumpism should replace conservatism, but because Trump was the only tool on hand at the time. Remember, Trump won a historic low percentage of votes in the Republican primaries to win the actual primaries. Okay, so it's not like he was well-loved inside the Republican Party. Once he was nominated, then the Republican Party swung behind him because he was the nominee against the most hated Democrat of my lifetime, Hillary Clinton. But that is not the same thing that Jeff Flake is saying. What Jeff Flake basically said in this speech is the Republican Party is a bunch of deplorables, right? I mean, he basically made the Hillary Clinton contention. The Republican Party is a bunch of deplorables who have fallen into league with Satan. Now, again, I think a lot of his critiques of Trump are true. And I think that people, I've been saying for a long time, people need to be intellectually honest about what Trump is and what Trump isn't, and they ought to call out lies and untruths and half-truths when they see them. They ought to call out the vulgarities and the stupidities that emanate from the White House. But that's not the same thing as saying that all Republicans are incapable of doing this. And this seemed to be Flake's contention. Flake was basically saying in this speech, listen, the reason I'm going down is not because of me. It's not even because of Trump. It's because the Republican Party has fallen into disrepair, that Republican constituents, my base, the people who elected me, are a bunch of dunderheads. It's not that they made a choice against Hillary Clinton. It's not that they held their nose and voted for Trump. It's not even that they like Trump, but they can also critique him. It's that they have fallen full scale into under the sway of President Trump. I think this is a wild overstatement. I also think it's a politically convenient one. So let's play Flake's speech, and then I'm going to explain what I think is really going on. So Flake gets up yesterday on the floor of the Senate, and he says that he is not going to run for re-election. He explains why.
Sustained incumbency is certainly not the point of seeking office, and there are times when we must risk our careers in favor of our principles. Now is such a time.
Okay, so he says that now is the time for all men of goodwill to stand up, except that he's resigning, right? He's not sticking around to fight Trump's bad agenda items. He's not sticking around to run for re-election and try and, wrest control of the party away from Trump. No, Jeff Flake is resigning. So where exactly is where is he risking his career in favor of principles? Where was the risk? Like, this is the part that I don't really buy. Okay, the idea that he risked his career to stop President Trump. Jeff Flake has been the most unpopular senator in the United States Senate since 2013. Okay, so long before Trump was running for president, long before anyone cared about Steve Bannon, long before anyone cared about Breitbart. Okay, the fact is that Jeff Flake was a very unpopular senator pretty much from the get-go. There's an article in The Atlantic in 2013 that was titled, How Jeff Flake Became the Most Unpopular Senator in the United States, right? 4 years ago, before Trump was a gleam in the media's eye or Bannon's eye, and Bannon wasn't a gleam in the media's eye, right? The fact is that Jeff Flake was already unpopular. And the reason that Jeff Flake was unpopular is because he was a hard-right congressman who won 75% of the vote in his district for several terms running. And then he came to the Senate and he decided to move to the center. The American Conservative Union points out, as Senator Flake's score is 80% over 4 years. As representative, his score was 98% over 10 years. It's a 20% drop-off in the ACU score. And it's not just that. Here's a list of some of his votes. Jason Johnson, who's a former Ted Cruz chief staffer, he laid out a bunch of the votes here. He suggested that well, here's what he says. It's tempting to comment on Flake's floor speech, instead offering context on his view of governing by highlighting a few of his votes. Jeff Flake was one of 10 Republican senators who voted to confirm Loretta Lynch for Attorney General. Flake voted to fund President Obama's unconstitutional executive amnesty. Flake voted against Senator Mike Lee's First Amendment Defense Act. Flake voted for President Obama's $1.1 trillion Cromnibus 2015 spending bill. Flake voted for S-2114, which increased Russia's power at the IMF. Flake voted for a clean debt limit suspension. Flake was one of only 11 Republican senators who voted to confirm Janet Yellen. Flake voted for the Ryan Murray budget, which lifted spending caps and raised taxes in exchanges for promises of future spending cuts. Flake voted for the Gang of Eight amnesty bill. Flake voted for the post-Newtown gun grab. Flake voted against the Defund Obamacare Act of 2013. Flake voted to increase debt by $900 billion in exchange for the promise of discretionary cuts in the future in 2011. Flake preferred John Kasich over Cruz or Trump in the 2016 GOP primary. Okay, so the point here is that Jeff Flake used to be a much more conservative guy, and he moved to the center, and as he did, he lost the support of the people of Arizona. Right? He looked disingenuous, and so he lost that support. So here he is saying that he's going down on the burning pyre of Trump, that he's falling on his sword, that he's basically the monk in Vietnam setting himself on fire to demonstrate to the entire world just how terrible President Trump is, but that's not really accurate. Jeff Flake was going to be primaried. He was going to run a very tight primary no matter what. Now, his opposition to President Trump hasn't helped him for sure. But again, I think that it's less about his opposition to President Trump and more about his opposition to the people who voted for President Trump. And this is a distinction worthy of note. Okay, you can oppose things that Trump does. You can even say, I don't think Trump makes a very good president. You can do all of those things. But what you can't do, and what he hasn't done, Jeff Flake has not voted against Trump's agenda items. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, Jeff Flake has voted with President Trump's agenda items. So when he says that he doesn't like Trump, it's really more a matter of what Trump says and what Trump does as president, not a matter of policy. So how that materializes is you can say, I think Trump is vulgarizing the discourse. I think President Trump would be better off if he stopped doing this stuff. I think President Trump is not a very good president because he's not doing these things. But that's not what Flake does. Instead, Flake seems to go at his own constituents, and he has been since April, basically saying the Republican Party was subject to a takeover by a bunch of dolts and morons. And I don't think that that's particularly smart politics, nor do I think it's true. I really don't think that's true. I think there are a bunch of people who voted for President Trump in the primaries who just thought he was the angriest guy on the stage and didn't think beyond that, which I do think is not smart. And then I think once we got past that, there were a lot of people who voted for Ted Cruz in the primaries, or voted for John Kasich in the primaries, who also voted for Donald Trump for president to stop Hillary Clinton. So Flake continues along these lines, and he decides that he is going to be the one who stands up to President Trump. Again, I think some of this is Flake posturing. The reason that I brought up his popularity ratings and his record is to demonstrate, I think that the real story here for Flake is this. Flake does have sincere opposition to President Trump. He does not like President Trump. He thinks President Trump is a boor and a vulgarian. I think some of those critiques are fair. I really do. But what's really happening here is that Flake was going to lose his primary anyway, and now he sees the opportunity to go out as the tragic hero who sacrificed himself in order to throw himself on the gears of the tank to stop President Trump, instead of just another senator who wasn't particularly popular in his home state and feels certain things about Trump. So now he has an interest in basically blaming Trump for his ouster. Now, Trump and Breitbart have an interest in taking credit for his ouster because they can say, listen, we run the movement now. If you cross Trump, we will toss you overboard. Right? If you cross Trump, if you cross Breitbart, we will toss you. Again, Kelly Ward's been running for Senate for well over a year. Breitbart's only gotten involved at the very tail end, and Bannon's only getting involved now. The same thing is true of Roy Moore in Alabama. Bannon and Breitbart basically backed the guy who finished third, Mo Brooks, in the primary until they switched to Roy Moore, and then they take credit. I think Jonah Goldberg has a good line about this. Bannon and Breitbart have a bad habit when it comes to these races of being the rainmaker who waits for it to, the first rule of rainmaking, as Jonah says, is wait for it to start raining and then start dancing, right? Because then people mistake the dancing for the cause of the rain. And I think that that's exactly what's happened here. So Breitbart and Trump have an interest in saying, we run the party now, cross us, and we'll burn you down. I don't think that's actually real. I don't think that's actually true. I think that you can cross Trump pretty much with impunity, actually, as long as you don't say that people who voted for him were wrong to do so, or not understandable, it was foolish and ridiculous for them to do so, or they're racist, sexist, bigot, homophobes who sign off on everything Trump does because they voted for him. That's lefty talk, and it's not accurate either. So the Trump and Bannon, I don't think, are telling the truth. I don't think Flake is telling the full truth. And I think the media have an interest in this narrative, too, because it does a couple of things for them. One, it allows them to create this perception that Trump is the evil manipulator behind the scenes, the Palpatine behind the scenes, making sure people like Bob Corker and Jeff Flake, the true heroes, are put to the boot. And I don't think that's interest number one. And interest number two is they like portraying the Republican Party is split, and so anything they can do to exacerbate that split, they will do. So here's Jeff Flake going after President Trump directly.
Mr. President, I rise today to say enough. We must dedicate ourselves to making sure that the anomalous never becomes the normal. With respect and humility, I must say that we have fooled ourselves for long enough that a pivot to governing is right around the corner, a return to civility and stability right behind it. We know better than that. By now, we all know better than that.
Okay, so there he is. We all know better. Nothing good is coming around the corner. Again, all of this is fair, but I don't know why it's effective or useful. Like, I think that we all have our feelings about President Trump. I've been highly critical of President Trump, but I do not know what the purpose of all this is. And then, and here's where he casts himself in the role of martyr. Here's where he does the Joan of Arc routine. He's going to hop up on that pyre and light the flame. He says that, this is not about political savvy. This is about principle. It's about principle. Well, if it were really about principle, you'd stick around and run for re-election and see if you can convince the Republican Party to agree with your principles. He's bowing out because he knows he's going to lose. Here he is.
Now, I'm aware that more politically savvy people than I will caution against such talk. I'm aware that there's a segment of my party that believes that anything short of complete and unquestioning loyalty to a president who belongs to my party is unacceptable and suspect.
Okay, so that last line, that my party believes anything short of complete and unquestioning loyalty to a president who belongs to my party is unacceptable and suspect. I think it's a pretty small segment of the party. I really do. I think the Bill Mitchells of the party, the people who think that Trump cannot be criticized under any circumstances, I don't think that's right. I just don't think that's true. I think there have been a number of senators who have criticized Trump, including Rand Paul, by the way, who's going to win his re-election easily. Yeah, you can criticize Trump so long as it doesn't feel like you're ripping his voters for voting for him. Again, he continues along these lines, and the martyr routine is a little bit strong here. He talks about how principled he is even more.
If I have been critical, it is not because I relish criticizing the behavior of the President of the United States. If I have been critical, it is because I believe it is my obligation to do so, and as a matter and duty of conscience. The notion that one should stay silent and as the norms and values that keep America strong are undermined, and as the alliances and agreements that ensure the stability of the entire world are routinely threatened by the level of thought that goes into 140 characters. The notion that we should say or do nothing in the face of such mercurial behavior is ahistoric, and I believe profoundly misguided.
Again, the idea that people aren't saying anything against Trump is just absurd. Everyone's saying things against Trump. Now, listen, I think some people have been cowards in this situation. I don't want to pretend that everyone has been, paragons of virtue here. I think Paul Ryan doing I've never seen his tweets routine. I think that Mitch McConnell doing I'm just going to ignore whatever the president says routine. I think that's wrong. I think that they should speak out. But again, I don't think speaking out is the same thing as saying that you're going to go down simply because you spoke out. I don't think that's correct. The reason I'm objecting so strenuously to this is because I know enough conservatives to know that we are a good-hearted party still that is attempting to do the right things. And I think that criticism of President Trump, so long as it's not taken as criticism of his voting base, I think that people are willing to go along with it. I think that what Jeff Flake is doing, and this is really what I object to, I feel like what Jeff Flake is doing here is he's surrendering the party to Trump and to Bannon and to and to the media's perception of what the Republican Party is, solely so that he can look as though he's a martyr to this new Republican Party, so that he can play Saint Thomas Becket and against Henry II. Like Henry II. I don't see the purpose of handing over the party. I don't think this is true. I don't think that you have to hand over the party to everything Trump says, and drawing this false dichotomy, which is really what Flake is doing here, between the Bill Mitchell wing of the party and the true speaking wing of the party, and you have to pick one of those two. I don't think that's right. I think that you don't have to agree with Jeff Flake on everything in order to criticize President Trump, nor do you have to say that everyone who voted for President Trump is going along with every element of his agenda in order to say that those people were voting for some. Listen, I disagreed with that vote, right? I didn't vote for anyone at the top of the ticket, but at least I understood why the vote was happening. And I'm not going to attribute bad motivations to the people who disagreed with me on that vote. I mean, that's silly, and that's what I feel like Flake is doing. And I've got to say, it feels like some of this is for posturing and personal gain, considering he came out with a book called Conscience of a Conservative 4 months ago, and then did the rounds talking about how bad Trump was in the middle of a tough primary fight. If you want to win a primary, you don't go out there and then suggest that the party that embraced President Trump is a nasty, terrible party. What you can do instead is you can say, they were misinformed, which I think is true, that they were lied to, which I think is true, that there were people who were preying on a justified anger, which I think is true. But this is the equivalent of, this really is the equivalent of, remember when Hillary was asked whether she blamed women who didn't show up to vote for her? And she said, yes, of course I blame them. It feels like some of this. So it's convenient for Jeff Flake to do that while he's stepping down. Again, this is not even me disagreeing with Flake's critique of President Trump. I don't think President Trump has been a very good president. I think he's actually been very negative for conservatives in a number of ways. That doesn't mean he's been that across the board. I mean, as I've said, Gorsuch, regulatory cuts, right? All these things are good. But I think that the narrative that's being told to you right now is not true. And I want to explain a little bit more about this and why everybody is trotting out this narrative in just a second. But first, I want to say thank you to our friends over at My Patriot Supply. So right now, if you are looking at the news and you see there's a wildfire in Northern California and Southern California and hurricanes in Florida and Texas and Puerto Rico, it seems like everywhere there's some sort of natural disaster where the people there would have been in good shape had they only had some sort of emergency food supply, or at least they would have been in better shape if they had. That's why you need to prepare, okay? Get a 102-serving survival food kit for just $99 from my friends at My Patriot Supply. It includes breakfast, lunches, and dinners. It's shipped to your home for free. Order a kit for yourself now. Call 888-803-1413. That's 888-803-1413. Or go online to preparewithben.com. Again, that's preparewithben.com. The emergency food lasts up to 25 years in storage. People in the office have tried it. They say it tastes like home cooking. 888-803-1413 or preparewithben.com. Again, that's preparewithben.com. Okay, so again, part of the problem with the speech is not that it was just an attack on Trump. I don't care. That's fine. Trump, I think, deserves to be attacked sometimes. I do it on a relatively frequent basis on the show. But it's Flake presenting himself as leader. If you see that the founders were right about people, the founding fathers basically said the reason they structured the Constitution the way they did is because they said people are ambitious. People want power. Ambition should therefore counteract ambition, right? They should check each other. If you see ambition as a prime mover in human motivation, then you're more likely to understand the political dynamic every day. So Jeff Flake is an ambitious guy, right? He's a senator. Of course he's ambitious. And here he is trying to set himself up as leader of the sort of anti-Trump conservative resistance, even though he has not been supremely conservative as a senator by any stretch of the imagination. He and John Kasich are sort of doing the same thing here. And if you look at Steve Bannon, he's trying to set himself up as the leader of Trumpism, even though there is no leader to Trumpism, because Trumpism doesn't exist. There is only Zool, right? Trump is the only one who exists. Trumpism is not a real philosophy. If you see that everyone is trying to set themselves up as leader, you're more likely to understand what's going on. So here is Jeff Flake trying to set himself up as leader in opposition to the bad, evil, terrible President Trump.
Leadership knows that most often a good place to start in assigning blame is to look somewhat closer to home. Leadership knows where the buck stops. Humility helps. Character counts. Leadership does not knowingly encourage or feed ugly or debased appetites in us.
Okay, again, I agree with a lot of this. I've said it before that all politicians pander to anger, that politicians make their bank off of anger. But his idea that I am the leader, right? That's the undercurrent here. Leadership knows this. Leadership knows that. Who knows that? I know that. Well, that's amazing. Look at that coincidence, right? He finishes up by, and this is the part where I have a problem, where he basically throws the entire conservative agenda under the bus, saying, I am the representative of that conservative agenda. If I cannot survive as an anti-Trump speaker, then no one can survive. The party has been taken over. Run for the hills. I'm not ready to run for the hills. I'm not ready to surrender the party to people who are anti-free trade. I'm not ready to surrender the party to people who are not just anti-illegal immigration, as I am, but anti-immigration generally, as I am not. Right? I'm not willing to surrender the party to, I think, the more base instincts of some people. I'm not ready to do that because I don't think that's my party. I don't think that's my movement. Maybe Jeff Flake is right. Maybe it's time for despair. There's a lot of despair, I think, in the traditional conservative movement, that the party has been soul-sucked. I feared that was going to happen when Trump took office. I fear it a little less now. I don't think that the party has been soul-sucked. I don't think every conservative has become a Trumpkin on every issue. I think that conservatives, as I've said before, see President Trump as a litmus test, that if you are going to say that Trump is awful, terrible, no good, very bad, evil, and unjustifiable, and that any vote for him was a bad vote, if you're going to say that, then that's not a referendum on Trump. That's a referendum on all the people who voted for him. It's the Hillary Clinton deplorables line all over again. I think that is a point that people are using Trump to elucidate. I think people are using Trump as a bit of a litmus test. But you can still oppose Trump when he does things that are wrong. You can still speak up when he does things that are stupid. And I think constituents mostly understand that because a lot of Congress people do that. But here is the final thing that Jeff Flake says that again, this is the part I really disagree with. This is why I think his motivations here are not entirely sterling.
It is clear at this moment that a traditional conservative who believes in limited government and free markets who is devoted to free trade, who is pro-immigration, has a narrower and narrower path to nomination in the Republican Party, the party that has so long defined itself by its belief in those things. It is also clear to me for the moment that we have given in or given up on the core principles in favor of a more viscerally satisfying anger and resentment. To be clear, the anger and resentment that the people feel at the royal mess that we've created are justified. But anger and resentment are not a governing philosophy. There is an undeniable potency to a populist appeal by mischaracterizing or misunderstanding our problems. The impulse to scapegoat and belittle threatens to turn us into a fearful, backward-looking people.
Okay, so I agree with a lot of the statements that he's making about the appeal to anger. I've said the exact same thing on this show. I don't disagree with him, but it's that first sentence that bothers me. The anger and the resentment, he is right. They are not a governing strategy. But he himself is suggesting that they are replete with a particular philosophy, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that's true. The same anger and resentment that drove the Tea Party to victory based on a small government platform drove President Trump to victory based on a populist platform, because anger does not have any philosophy to which it attaches exclusively. Anger, it can be anti-establishment anger, and that's what we're watching. And that's why I have hope for the future of the conservative movement, because I think that anger can be turned and should be turned toward the right things, not the wrong things. I think President Trump has turned things toward the wrong things. I think he's turned anger toward things that are unjustified. I think that he has excused bad behavior. I think that he has made the case on philosophically false grounds that the American people are being screwed by people who really have nothing to do with it. I think all of those things are true. But the idea that represents that Trumpism is the final iteration of Americans' anger, that Trumpism is the final stage of Republican anger, I don't think that's right. I think Trump was the most convenient, angry guy at their disposal, and they picked him, and it's that simple. It's not that they have rejected limited government and free markets. Right? It's not that they've rejected limited government and free markets. I agree that anger cannot be the prime motivator for conservative thought. But to suggest that anger has become that prime motivator and Trump is the sole evidence you need and Jeff Flake's ouster is the sole evidence you need is self-serving and a little bit hypocritical. Okay, so I want to talk more about this, plus things I like, things I hate, and a little bit of Bible talk. But for that, you're going to have to go over to dailywire.com. For just $9.99 a month, you can get a subscription to dailywire.com, get the rest of the show live on video, get the rest of Michael Knowles' show live on video, get the rest of Andrew Klavan's show live on video. You can be part of our mailbags as well and correspond with us when we do conversations. We do this every month. We take just nothing but questions for an hour and a half, and you can ask the questions if you are a member. Plus, if you want an annual subscription, you get all those things, plus this Leftist Tears hot or cold tumbler, which is the greatest beverage vessel ever created by human or godly hands. It is just incredible. Again, the big mistake that the bad guy makes in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is that he does not pick this mug. Had he done so, then all would have been well, and his face would not have fallen off, and he wouldn't have turned into a horrible-looking skeleton. So for $99 a month, you can get all of those things, plus this particular mug. And the Shapiro store is coming. I keep saying it. It's coming. Okay? It is. I promise. I've seen the gear. Also, we recommend highly that you go and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube right now, just click on Daily Wire right there and subscribe. We have plenty of other content that is coming out from Daily Wire that is not just our shows, shorts, digital shorts, all sorts of really great stuff. Videos from my college speeches, all that stuff is available at our Daily Wire account over at YouTube. So please go over there and subscribe, or listen later at iTunes or SoundCloud. For free, obviously, and you can do that on YouTube as well. Leave us a review. We always appreciate it. We are the largest, fastest-growing conservative podcast in the nation.